Hey guys, this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? Please don't forget to hit that like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you get anything from my work, a connected dot, an epiphany, a mind-blown moment, a new book to read, a new author to explore, please consider supporting my work, and all the links are at the bottom of the video. The truth about evolution in the Bible. The serpent power. I was going to read Blavatsky. Got to read this first. Toodles, spirit guides. Serpent power. Quote, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. End quote. Genesis. The serpent was not the initiator of evil among mankind, but the initiator of wisdom. For the serpent was universally used among all ancient peoples as a symbol of divine wisdom. Jesus referred to it in this sense when he admonished his disciples, quote, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves, end quote. Assyrian and Druid priests were called serpents of wisdom, just as initiates in India and Tibet today are called Nagas or serpents. See, not all reptilians are bad. To grow in size and expand, it is necessary for a serpent to cast off its old, inelastic, limited skin at certain intervals. The serpent is therefore the universal symbol of this spiritual growth and expansion of consciousness by which alone divine wisdom can be obtained. To advance spiritually, we must cast off many misconceptions which in our early stages of unfoldment we thought were true spiritual teachings. Yet true spiritual teachings are never a hampering skin, but bring inner illumination and expansion of consciousness. Therefore, by transcending the limitations of less mature concepts, and by overcoming, transmuting, or mastering the lower forces and temptations of the world, the flesh, and the devil, the initiate is said to have cast off his outer hampering conditions as the serpent does his skin, and to be born again. In the Bible, Moses is made to descend from the tribe of Levi, a serpent tribe. Ashana calls them Leviathan. Gautama Buddha descended from a race of Nagas or serpent kings who ruled Magda, and Hermes is represented by a snake symbol as Tet. The common misconception of serpent symbol has created such a consciousness of evil that it is well to elaborate somewhat on its derivation and true meaning according to Hebrew scholars who have spiritualized and specialized on the derivation of the word use. First, the word translated serpent is not the Hebrew word remes, which means creeping things and reptiles. Second, at the time Moses wrote, The serpent was not the symbol of evil among the people in the world. The Hindus regarded it as a symbol of life and wow. Projection, productivity. Got it. In Greece, it was the protecting genius of the physician and healing. Among the Africans, it was a symbol of protecting good. And in many other lands, it was a symbol of life and divine power of healing. Third, among the Hebrews themselves, the serpent represented God power from the time of Moses up to the time of Hezekiah. When Moses was still in Egypt, he was commanded by the Lord God to cast his rod upon the ground. And when he did so, it became a serpent. Exodus. This was proof of Moses, the God was with him. When Moses wished to go before Pharaoh endowed with the power of God, he was commanded by the Lord God to carry with him the rod, which could be turned into a serpent. Allegorically speaking, it was using the word serpent in this sense of healing through a God power that Moses was told to make a fiery serpent of brass and set it upon a pole or a tree, by the beholding of which those who had been bitten by vipers would be healed. As a matter of fact, the Hebrew word nachash, translated in this one instance as serpent, in the same word that is translated many times afterward as brass. Seemingly, this translation of nachash for serpent is an unbelievably careless or ignorant interpretation, for it is the only place in the Bible where it is translated as serpent. Only when the universal symbology of the serpent is understood is the translation seen to convey the idea intended, divine wisdom. Only since the Dark Ages, when the function of sex was condemned as evil by superficial students, has it been taught that the serpent symbolizes sex functions, and it is still commonly so regarded today by the undiscriminating. But there is no warrant in the story of the Garden of Eden for any such assumption, for mere assumption it surely is. According to the Bible story, the sex function cannot be regarded as evil. It was built into man's body by the Creator himself. To think of the creative force as evil is to belittle the wisdom and the goodness of God, who gave it to man and attributed evil to him. If the so-called fall occurred as a result of an act never intended by God or nature and was a sin, how about the animals? Did they also sin in using their procreative powers? Manifestly, such an idea is absurd. The misconception arises only through the speculations and misunderstandings of the philosophically unenlightened. For when God had created all things, God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Hence, God made no mistake in providing man with that function, as many theological wise men think he did. Not only did God not make any mistake in providing the body with the sex function, but he picked out the function for a particular combination and blessed it and told men to use it normally for its proper use. Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. Shall mortal man be just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his maker? What God hath cleaned, that call not thou common. As we have already said, if the race is to be propagated in vileness, every child that is born must bear the burden of a thought of something vile and impure, connect with it birth. It is no wonder that children so conceived have little love or respect for their unwilling parents. For this reason, the salvation of the race depends upon the pure in heart conceiving children in love and purity. For it is perpetuation of the race is left to the impure, and ignorant conditions must grow worse. For this is one of the chief reasons for the large proportion of the unfit from morons and the feeble-minded to congenitally insane. Since the use of this function is only method by which an immortal soul or spiritual beings can find incarnation on earth, and since it was the only function man was specifically told to use, and whose use was specifically blessed, it certainly is not evil in itself, nor its use prohibited. All such ideas have arisen from misconceptions of it due to a materialistic and unenlightened medieval interpretation of the allegory. As we have already explained, this belief has given rise to doctrines which teach man to despise and try to kill out this greatest gifts. But as long as the serpent of sex is accused and degraded by man's thought, it is doomed to crawl upon the ground and bring forth its progeny of vipers in darkness and filth, and women is doomed to conceive and bring forth in pain and suffering instead of purity and joy. Women have suffered the most. By that suffering, she should have developed her spiritual intuition. The sex force is considered impure only because the spiritually blind have decreed that it shall be considered impure. They assume that they are wiser and holier than he who created them, he who breathed into them the living fire of creative force. Being wiser than the gods, they have decreed that normal expression of sex function, even within married relation, shall be considered vile, and that it shall be suppressed. The result is already apparent. What then is the true meaning of the word translated serpent, and what the meaning of the allegory as a whole? The Hebrew word used is nachesh, whose root meaning is divine experience. The serpent is represented as beguiling Eve. The word translated as beguiled is nasha, whose root meaning is to lift up. Nasha, the form used in the verse under discussion, is translated as lift up to the text of the standard Protestant concordance. It is never mistranslated beguiled in any other place in the Bible. Therefore, what Eve really said was that because she followed what divine wisdom serpent told her, a divine experience had lifted her up, and she naturally wished Adam to share it with her. What was a divine experience? It was certainly not use of sex function, for it was not until far later, after they had left Eden, that Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain. This explanation of the symbology of Eve and the serpent confirms what we said in the chapter 8 as to the role women was meant to play, being the more intuitive of the twain, who are one. She has the gift of being able to see and understand the mystical truths and ideals of the serpent, divine wisdom, necessary for both. And she is not fulfilling her mission unless she presents them for man to share. The experience of so-called temptation is correctly described as being due to a serpent because it referred to the serpentine character of the mysterious force, for which we have no term in English, but which in the Sanskrit is called the Kundalini force. The development and use of this force is unfolding of the psychic centers of the body is a highly technical science, as it is the use of electricity, the X-rays, or radium, and about which little of its practical functioning is known in the Western world, but concerning which many ponderous volumes have been written. And it is even more dangerous if attempted without the personal training and oversight of one who, as in the other sciences mentioned above, is thoroughly vested and versed in all its laws and is an adept in its use. We can therefore refer to here only in general outline, just sufficient to meaning of the tree, the serpent, and the temptation. Basically, it is an electro-spiritual force, a creative power, which, when aroused into action, can as easily kill as it can create. Just so with the creative power of sex. It can be used normally both to provide bodies for the souls who are seeking incarnation on earth, and also as an expression of affection and love, which shall unite the twain as one with the divine love, which is their source. But if the sex functions are concentrated upon and artificially stimulated and worshipped from babyhood for the purpose of ministering merely to an abnormality stimulated lust, then it brings forth only the weeds of the garden, physical degeneration and moral degradation, sin, loathsome diseases, and premature death. Since brass is an alloy composed of two metals, copper belonging to Venus, divine love, and zinc connected with the earth, its composition symbolizes that for the proper manifestation of the serpent on earth, there must be an alloy or combination of its two elements in heavenly and the earthly, divine wisdom and physical kundalini force, lifted up to the pole of the spinal cord or sap of the tree. In the average man, the serpent power normally passes around and up the spinal cord, the tree in the midst of the garden body, reflectively, and without man's being aware of it, in a spiral or serpentine manner. Its positive and negative currents are called Ida and Pingala, and they cross over each other at certain levels to form nodes of force or chakras. This is all graphically outpictured in the caduceus, or wand of Hermes, the use of which is said to confer both healing and wisdom. This symbol consists of a straight rod representing the spinal cord, surmounted by a knob representing the medulla oblongata, and the head, with two serpents twining around the rod from bottom to top. It is used today as a symbol of the physician. When properly unfolded, controlled, and used uprightly, the serpent power no longer twines all around the spinal cord like a serpent, but passes directly up the central canal of the spinal cord to the brain, changing from serpent into a rod of power, the God power symbolized by the rod of Moses and Aaron, the wand of Hermes, and Brahman Andalda, or knotted stick carried by Hindu aesthetics. For there comes a time in the spiritual unfoldment of every soul when the spiritual seed of Christhood planted in the garden of man's physical body at the base of the spine begins to put forth. Then the manifestation of the spiritual fire, the spiritual creative force, like a mighty volcano, begins to erupt, for it must push its way upward through all obstacles and making straight the path of God consciousness, instead of following the serpentine path as during the less developed stages of spiritual evolution or when used for mere psychic development. During the process of making a straight path to the brain, the ascending kundalini fire, or serpent power, stimulates into a higher octave of activity the 7 sacred centers or chakras along the spine, whose higher functioning gives to man the siddhis, or super physical psychic powers. These are not spiritual powers in themselves, for their development merely enables man to use his 5 senses in a higher octave of vibration or function consciously in that semi-physical world, which is just above the physical world. But when this current of spiritual fire reaches the brain, it stimulates those higher centers whose unfoldment brings to man that divine experience or spiritual illumination promised to Eve by the serpent, by means of which man should become as gods, knowing good and evil, and whose proper use will ultimately enable man to face the flaming sword and re-enter Eden, from which the law of good Lord God drove him when he had ignorantly aroused and perverted the serpent power. As the serpent force spreads out at the base of the brain and then pushes upward toward the top of the head, it forms a small cross called the cross of suffering. For it is upon this cross that the body is crucified, as the atoms of the flesh are subjugated to the transmutating and spiritualizing effects of the spiritual fire. It is this mystic cross which forms the hilt of the sword of the Spirit, and is symbolized by the cross on the hilt of the swords of the Knights of the Holy Grail, whose real mystic quest was none other than the obtainment of the same divine experience of spiritual illumination. When aroused artificially and without proper preparation, or out of due season, or if improperly controlled and perverted, the serpent power stimulates only the lower aspects of the centers, and thus tempts man to use his newly discovered creative powers of mind and body for self-gratification and the self-indulgence of the merely animal nature, so that sex impulses are often mistaken for desires of real self. This brings about an entirely different kind of crucifixion, not the voluntary crucifixion of spiritualization and transmutation, which enables man to enter the next higher kingdom of Superman, but the involuntary crucifixion of the flesh through disease and degradation, which sinks man below the level of animal kingdom beneath him. You know, that was good. The serpent power continued. Quote, "Thou shalt surely die" is usually considered a penalty for man's defilement of Eden, but in reality, even this death sentence was but the working of the immutable law of divine love. For immortality under conditions of impurity, sickness, and suffering would be a punishment for surpassing even the medieval concepts of a physical hell. End quote. The voice of Isis. The Curtises. In the early races, when the forces of evolution were forced on the body and on the development of the newly acquired fifth principle, self-conscious mind, the stimulus of the Kundalini was so great that its vibrations were very largely shut out, those of the inner guidance. That is, the more the attention was occupied by the vibrations of mind and of the outside world, the less attention was given to the inner spiritual vibrations from the real self. Just as is the case today, it was therefore this mind which should have ruled the garden of as a husbandman under the direction of the Lord God, which was perverted by the vibrations of the desires of the flesh and the things of the outer world. It was because of this misuse of the serpent power that the serpent is represented as being cursed. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. For just as the rod of Moses and Aaron became a serpent when cast upon the ground, so does the Kundalini fire becoming a stinging serpent, which allowed to crawl up the ground instead of being lifted up into a rod of power. As long as man's creative power is allowed to crawl upon its belly, it must eat of the dust or the offscourgings of the earth, and bring to man the dire results which curse him, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children, until the third and to the fourth generation. We must remember that neither the ground nor the serpent power was cursed by God, but was cursed by the evil which resulted from man's misuse and perversion of his creative powers of body and mind. Only as man lifts up the serpent power upon the pole or tree, spinal cord, in the wilderness of the outer life, as Moses lifted it up on a pole in the wilderness, lives a life of purity, chastity, and the wise control, can it become the God power which shall restore to health all man's functions and faculties, symbolized by children of Israel, which have been poisoned by the vipers of impurity and perversion. In this sense, the serpent symbolizes humanity as a whole, for as long as humanity crawls upon its belly or does not lift its consciousness up from the crawling on the physical plane and following after appetites, desires, and lusts of the belly, does not seek for spiritual food, it must accept to reap in suffering and sorrow the results of feeding upon the offscourgings or dust of the ground, as well as the dust of ignorance and old conceptions, long since proved to be but the dust of the ages. As long as he crawls upon his belly, man is very truth a stinging serpent, poisoning his own life, his fellow man, and society as a whole. But with his creative powers of mind and body uplifted by a determined will as strong as shining as brass, and illumined by the celestial light that shines from his at one mint with the Lord God, or law of his good, the radioactivity of the spiritual God power flowing through him will help to heal all those who are bitten by the vipers of sin, sickness, and sorrow. For to everyone who looks to him and recognizes the brazen will or illumined serpent power, he will bring life and healing. If therefore the fruit of the tree is eaten it is ripe. That is, if man attempts to use this higher mystic powers, he can reach the stage of spiritual growth and gain the spiritual understanding through which alone he can normally unfold these centers like the petals of a rose. The attempt to use them can bring only inharmony, suffering, and premature death. For better not eat of the fruit of these higher powers at all. That is, it is far better to be just a good, wholesome, normal human being and take a little longer to evolve into the superhuman kingdom than try to force a development for which neither mind, character, nor body is normally prepared. When man is unprepared for its proper control and use, the very God power of the divine ecstasy of the serpent power itself, which is given to man in due season to make him as the gods, knowing the good and evil, becomes the flaming sword which guards the gates, centers, or chakras of the garden. For men can safely use the supernormal God powers in such a way that Nachash, the divine experience, can beguile or lift him up into ecstasy of spiritual consciousness. He must have gained the wisdom and the moral strength of character to use such higher dynamic power consciously and constructively under the guidance of the Lord God of his garden, or the indwelling spiritual man or higher self within. To every soul who sincerely strives to do his best, according to this stage of evolution, to express harmony in his life and helpfulness to his fellow man, the time will come in some incarnation when these centers will open as normally as the petals of a rose. But if he tries to force them open, they are ready. The beauty and fragrance and joy of life will wither and fall into the ground and be lost in the dust of the earth like fallen petals. I'm going to put a tiny pause here because I think what they're saying is vital. There's a lot of people out there who are not spiritually, they're consciously there, but on a spiritual level are not. And they force things that are not ready for them to be gained. I've heard a lot of people who want their third eye to open up, not realizing it's halfway already there. And then they see things that they can't really quite grasp and comprehend. And it's like, well, why did you want it so bad that you weren't prepared for what you were going to see? And that's just going to shut you down further because you're scared. Can't be in a scare framework. You can't have the fear within your aura, or else you're going to attract those things. Never rush something. It all happens in divine timing. And again, that gets frustrating because you're waiting, you're going into meditation, you're doing the yoga, you're doing the work, and it's just not happening. Well, because it's not your time yet. And that is determined by your higher self, not necessarily your conscious little avatar here. So just be aware of forcing something that is gonna happen eventually, maybe not this lifetime. That's up to your contract that you made with Source. Don't force things that won't go and will happen in its own way for you. Very important. That speaks volumes. I know too many people that have done these things a little prematurely and had to come and run to me because they didn't know what the hell was happening to them. They were not prepared. They were not well read or studied. They just heard this concept. Everybody's talking about it, and boom. Now they don't get it. It's open and you're receiving, but you don't know how to process any of it. So just be aware, and I'm sure everybody that's listening to this is well aware of these things, but for those of you who come and just venture to find a video to watch, just be aware of some of these concepts and all the people that are talking about it and doing all these programs and all these meditations and all these yoga styles. Open your kundalini. That's great. Are you ready for it spiritually? Do you understand what you're undertaking by doing that? The third eye, do you understand the things that you might see in nature that you haven't been able to perceive before because you didn't have the eyes to see it? Some things are not that pretty to look at. It's still of God. Can't have fear in your heart. And you have to understand the divine plan and the things that are in that divine plan. Sorry, my back is killing me. We have some weather coming in. Back to the book. It is usually understood that Adam and Eve were driven out of the garden for having used the perfectly natural and normal functions of sex. But we are distinctly told, Genesis 22:3, that this was not the reason. They were banished from the garden lest they partook of that other tree, the tree of life, and became immortal and lived forever in the flesh. Sounds like the Leviathan races. Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil, and now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, for to obtain immortality in the flesh, while still enveloped in a grossly animal body, as deflective and unevolved as it was during the early races, or even in the more evolved body of man today, which is still much a hampering garment for the expression of the indwelling spiritual man, would be a greater curse than any imaginable hell. Man was first to turn out of his garden individually, not by God, but by his own misuse of his opportunities, forces, and materials, which brought death, which all its attended ills and miseries, for into his own body, and then into the body politic. Thus man finds death mixed with every draught of life, and his Eden no longer a pure and perfect globe, but impregnated with death, and his body no longer a quite protected garden, filled with goodly fruits, which are his for the picking, for by his own actions he has automatically turned himself out of the garden, lest he eat of the tree of life and live forever in imperfection. Since in harmony, sin, sickness, and death cannot exist in the pure aura of the real or spiritual self, the sinful man had to be cast out of his garden, where all things are pure, perfect, and immortal, and where health and happiness are his natural heritage. Man can re-enter his garden only when he has so purified himself in mind and body that his vibrations are so greatly raised as once more to coincide with those of the garden. But once man was precipitated out of the garden, thenceforth, he must till the soil of earth conditions from the outside. By the sweat of his brow, must learn through physical exertion, experience, and suffering that these conditions are not his real home, must learn to recognize the sphere of divine consciousness and radiate spiritual force, which his true home or garden, and seek to prepare himself to re-enter in it a spiritual and immortalized body. Only when man has learned that mind is but a gift of God to be used for his glory, that illumined spiritual consciousness can be bestowed upon him only by a power outside of and above mind, through spiritual development and initiation into a higher stage of consciousness, can he return to his garden. Only when we learn that mind is merely the servant of the real self, or the superintendent of our garden, until whom is given the wise direction of all its forces, yet who must be responsible to the Lord of life, who is the real indweller, can the serpent be turned into the rod of power, at whose knock the gates of Eden shall fly open and admit us to our heritage. And that's so true. That's so true. Okay, I'm gonna leave it here on that topic. In the next chapters, unity of duality. That's gonna have to wait, because that's super important, and that has to be discussed. But going back to the serpent, the human experience that we're all living right now, it's a part of the plan, God's plan. So the Eden that we are seeking, the garden that we are seeking, is our higher selves. And where is our higher selves? In a higher up density. We don't see our higher selves. We don't see our other selves. There's plenty of them. When this physical vehicle does pass away, two things. One, we achieved what we needed to achieve here on this physical plane, and we moved up. We are going to get healed. We're going to have a life review. We're going to see a whole lot of things. Good, the bad, the ugly, and what we have learned, and move forward. Though we're in a different type of time where we're being harvested to move up in consciousness and density. It's a lot of confusion going on right now. There's a lot of misconceptions happening. There's still people holding on very, 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 very tight to those Bibles and into all their scriptures, not just the Bible, the Quran, the Torah. Open your minds if you haven't already done so. And it doesn't need to be just those 3 books. I know people that have written to me in emails that they're in cults about a wasp. Open your perception. All the books that I read, I so read with an objective mind. I resonate with things, and you're going to resonate with most things in books that you read because you read them to enjoy them, right? You see a book and you see the title, it captures you, and you're resonating with it. But not everything in that book are you going to personally resonate with. If you take anything away from all the esoteric work, it's not bashing Christianity. It's not bashing religion. It's saying, look, it's been askewed. Things have been infiltrated. It's 1984. We need the truth. And guess what? It's not coming anytime soon. So we have to find the truth for ourselves. These people written this stuff a very long time ago and already had a concept of really looking at it rationally and logically what these things could actually mean, and they're not far off. Especially the Curtises, very on it. We just need to hold into our own selves, our accountability of our actions that we do every day. What are we doing for other people? Again, the guy that I saw almost 2 years ago now about the Amish mindset, is a guy that goes around and does interviews and looks into like these cultural stuff. He's doing now stuff on the Native Americans. He goes in and does documentaries. He did a documentary on the Amish, and all of a sudden, Amish mindset. Spirit's like, oh no, you need to watch him that was for a reason. It's not to say to follow the Amish ways of life. It's just to say, look how self-sustaining they are. Look at the community that they build. And no, you don't need to practice their religion to understand how if all of us come together and work together as a humanity, as a collective consciousness, we're going to move up faster and further than if we do it individually. It took 300 men to lift up a barn thing, and move it across a field. If we're shifting humanity's consciousness on an upward scale, how do we do that if everybody's stuck on way too many different paradigms? We need to come together and stick with a plan. And their plan is basically saying, you hold the power within yourself. You are the Christ. You are the garden. Eden is where your higher self is dwelling. We're human and we are imperfect, but we are the perfect lights for ourselves. You have to put the positive motion into that pendulum to swing it to the positive side, so it's not kicking all the way back into the negative. It's only going. Again, Kabbalion, read it. Too many laws to. But I'm going to leave it there. Just think about it. Law of one. We're all one. We're all a part of God. Watch my powder video. That will definitely help you, because it's putting yourself in that character's position and moving through some very tough childhood experiences, because it takes you through. I mean, obviously, as an adult playing and acting out a role, but if you put yourself in and you heal those childhood traumas and you heal the things in your lower chakras, that's what they're talking about. If you're stuck in your root, in your solar plexus, what are we missing? Tick, 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 tick. Getting stuck here. Let's get unstuck. And let's do that as a humanity, because we need that now. Sending each and every one of you protection, love, light, and shielding, because we all need that right now. Please be safe, be seen. I want to have everybody have a wonderful weekend. Please enjoy. Be safe out there. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.